Bumpy Johnson stood as a towering figure in the annals of American organized crime, reigning over Harlem with an iron fist from the 1930s to the 1960s. While names like Al Capone and Lucky Luciano are often synonymous with crime, Bumpy's influence was paramount in his domain. If one sought to operate within Harlem's illicit enterprises, they inevitably crossed paths with him. Even though Bumpy's notoriety might not echo as loudly today, his legacy persists. Frank Lucas, a notorious figure himself, once remarked that in Harlem, dealings went through Bumpy Johnson or faced dire consequences. Police, politicians, and even the Mafia found themselves entangled with him. In an era marred by racial prejudice, Bumpy defied the odds, ascending to the summit of organized crime as an African American. Born Ellsworth Raymond Johnson on October 31, 1905, in Charleston, South Carolina, Bumpy's journey began humbly. Raised in a devoutly religious household, his parents, William and Margaret Johnson, instilled values of respect and community. Despite facing the obstacles of racial segregation, the Johnson family found solace and solidarity within Charleston's Black enclave. With a father working as a fisherman and a mother as a domestic worker, theirs was a modest existence, yet they thrived within their community. Bumpy's ascent from these modest beginnings to becoming the undisputed kingpin of Harlem epitomizes the grit and determination required to carve one's path, even in the shadows of society's constraints. Ellsworth, nicknamed Bumpy for a bump on his skull, carried this moniker throughout his life. At a tender age of 1 or 2, he resided primarily with his father and brother Willie, while his mother juggled jobs in Charleston and New York. His absence created a void, prompting Bumpy to seek maternal solace elsewhere. Despite familial challenges, Bumpy displayed remarkable intellect and eloquence in school, even skipping grades in Charleston's public education system. However, his education abruptly halted, a source of shame given his family's emphasis on learning. To mask this, he spun tales of attending prestigious institutions, capitalizing on his wit to evade scrutiny. Bumpy's defiance simmered alongside a keen awareness of racial injustice in the segregated South. When Bumpy was just 10 years old, racial discrimination cast a dark shadow over his family. His older brother Willie, then 19, faced accusations of killing a white man in South Carolina. In an era where racial tensions ran high, such allegations often led to vigilante justice, as exemplified by the horrifying lynching of Kit Boucar in nearby Berkeley County in 1904. Boucar's fate, tortured and drowned by a mob despite a minor altercation, underscored the peril faced by black individuals accused of offenses against whites. Fearing a similar fate for Willie, the Johnson family swiftly orchestrated his escape to New York, where their daughters Myrtle and Pauline already resided. The specter of racial violence haunted the Johnsons, underscoring the pervasive injustice that defined their lives in the segregated South. In 1919, at the age of 14, Bumpy joined his sisters Myrtle and Pauline in Harlem, a move orchestrated by his father in pursuit of a better life for his son. Despite his young age, Bumpy's diminutive stature belied his tough demeanor, though he often found himself a target for the rougher elements of his new neighborhood. On his first day of school in Harlem, Bumpy encountered trouble just blocks away from the school gates. Witnessing a group of teenagers gambling on the street corner, he caught their attention, only to be accosted by one of the boys demanding to know what he carried in his pockets. Unfazed, Bumpy defiantly replied, "My hand. What's it to you?" This retort sparked a confrontation, with another boy named Six Night threatening violence, while onlookers wagered on the outcome of the impending scuffle between Six and Bumpy. Six's punch sailed wide, missing Bumpy's chin by a hair's breadth. Bumpy, nimble and quick, evaded the blow effortlessly, throwing his assailant off balance. As promised, Bumpy withdrew his hand from his pocket, crimson spurting into the air upon its emergence. With swift precision, Bumpy landed a punishing blow to Six's side, staggering his opponent. Yet despite the onslaught, Six clung tenaciously to Bumpy's pants, refusing to yield. Another strike from Bumpy sent coins scattering from Six's grasp, igniting protests from those who had bet against him. Unrelenting, Bumpy continued his assault, each blow driving Six closer to defeat. Finally, with a forceful kick to the groin, Bumpy brought Six crashing to the ground. Before he could deliver another blow, however, a hand seized him by the collar, halting his assault. "Enough, Big Nose!" the intervening figure declared, acknowledging Bumpy's victory while preventing further harm. Despite Bumpy's defiance, the intervention remained steadfast, reminding him of the stakes involved and the consequences of unchecked violence. After the altercation that cemented their friendship, Bumpy, Nath, Finley, and Johnny became inseparable. With Bumpy leading the way, they embarked on various ventures to earn money, from hustling at billiards and craps to selling newspapers and cleaning sidewalks. But it was Bumpy's keen intellect that set their course. Recognizing the potential for greater profits, Bumpy proposed offering protection services to local businesses. This endeavor brought them into contact with Bob, a formidable figure known for his ruthless demeanor and imposing stature. Bob's propensity for violence made him a force to be reckoned with, standing tall at 6 to 5 inches with a menacing presence. Bumpy's entrepreneurial spirit led him to extort funds from businesses in exchange for safeguarding them against local thugs and rival gangs. One fateful encounter with Bob occurred when the latter sought to offer protection to a grocery store on 7th Avenue, only to find Bumpy already providing security. Standing by Bob's black Lincoln, arms folded and gaze unwavering, Bumpy's presence spoke volumes, prompting the store owner to declare, "This little N************." At just 16 years old, Bumpy found himself facing off against a man nearly 3 times his age and over a foot taller. When Bob confronted him, questioning his audacity, Bumpy stood his ground, asserting his claim over the neighborhood with unwavering confidence. Acknowledging Bumpy's boldness, Bob saw potential in the young hustler and offered him a partnership. Thus, Bumpy's journey into the depths of the Harlem underworld began. As months passed without Bumpy attending school, his sister Myrtle grew increasingly concerned. Despite her pleas for him to return to his studies, the allure of easy money kept him away. Throughout the 1920s, Bumpy and Bob U. Light thrived in various illegal enterprises, expanding their protection racket from grocery stores to clubs, speakeasies, and even illegal lotteries. Bob's mentorship and Bumpy's sharp intellect propelled them to new heights, securing their place among the wealthiest and most powerful figures in Harlem. Bumpy and his associates spared no expense in safeguarding their earnings, recruiting the toughest bodyguards from the neighborhood. Among them was a rising star, quickly earning renown as one of Harlem's finest. His reputation soared, especially after catching the attention of Stephanie Sinclair, hailed as the queen of the illegal lottery. Stephanie, a French-born gang leader, had amassed considerable wealth and influence within Harlem's gambling circuit during the 1920s. Impressed by Bumpy's prowess, she entrusted him with protecting her lucrative enterprises, eventually making him her personal bodyguard. Their relationship blossomed beyond business, with Bumpy often accompanying her to events like theater outings. In Stephanie's presence, Bumpy admired her sophistication and grace, forging a bond that transcended their criminal endeavors. Bumpy admired Stephanie not only for her elegance, but also for her fierce determination to defend her turf, a quality tested when the Mafia set their sights on Harlem's gambling operations in the 1930s. The illegal lottery, a cash cow in this part of New York, became a prime target for the Mafia's encroachment, led by the Schultz gang affiliated with the 5 families of New York. Schultz, whose wealth stemmed from bootlegging during Prohibition, pivoted to Harlem's lucrative illegal lottery scene after the repeal of Prohibition in 1933. As the Great Depression gripped the nation, the allure of the numbers game, akin to a lottery for the less affluent, became irresistible for Harlem's residents. With bets as low as $1 potentially yielding winnings of up to $600, the game flourished, raking in over $50 million annually by the early 1930s. Some lottery owners even out-earned the President of the United States, underscoring the immense scale of the operation. Schultz wasted no time seizing the opportunity presented by Harlem's booming illegal lottery. Known for his ruthless demeanor and penchant for violence, Schultz's threats carried weight, instilling fear in those who crossed his path. His methods were as brutal as they were calculated. He didn't hesitate to resort to extreme measures to assert his dominance. Sending his men into Harlem, Schultz extended an offer to lottery owners. Join forces with him in exchange for protection from law enforcement and rival gangs, conveniently orchestrated threats included. This coercive tactic allowed Schultz to infiltrate Harlem's gambling scene, rapidly expanding his criminal empire. However, Stephanie Sinclair refused to yield to Schultz's demands, sparking a conflict between the two factions. Despite being under Sinclair's employ, Bumpy had a history of run-ins with the law, serving time for various offenses including burglary, assault, and robbery. His release from prison in late 1931 marked a pivotal moment in his criminal career. After serving a 2.5-year stint, Stephanie Sinclair found herself confronted by baby Violet, now aligned with Schultz's organization. Bob sought to persuade Sinclair to join their ranks, a proposition that only fueled her fury. Despite Sinclair's resolve, her faction faced mounting pressure following her refusal to capitulate to Schultz's demands. Drive-by shootings, brutal assaults on her employees, and relentless threats plagued her operations, yet Sinclair managed to maintain her grip on Harlem's gambling empire. Her loyal men stood by her side, inspired by Sinclair's resilience and unwavering determination. However, some succumbed to the relentless coercion from Schultz's camp, abandoning Sinclair in her time of need. Nevertheless, she clung to hope, knowing that one individual was about to re-enter the fray: Bumpy. Freshly released from prison at 25 years old, Bumpy returned to the streets of Harlem, where he encountered baby Violet in a bar. As they exchanged greetings, the weight of their experiences behind bars hung heavy in the air, a testament to the harsh realities they faced. The tension in Harlem was palpable as Bob, representing Schultz, and baby Violet, acting as a go-between, vied for Bumpy's allegiance in the brewing conflict. With Sinclair's desire for Bumpy's support widely known, all eyes were on him, waiting to see which side he would choose. Baby Violet wasted no time, offering Bumpy a familiar role: keeping order on the streets, ensuring compliance with the illicit lottery operations, and dealing with any who dared to stray, especially those working for Tully, the Jew rumored to be encroaching on Harlem's turf. Surprised by Bob's knowledge of the situation, Bumpy's suspicions were aroused. Bob, seemingly testing Bumpy's loyalty, hinted at tensions rising between Schultz and Tully's forces, insinuating an opportunity for Bumpy to align with Schultz for a lucrative offer. But Bumpy, resolute in his principles, refused to be swayed by promises of financial gain at the expense of his community. Rejecting Bob's offer to broker a deal with Schultz, Bumpy stood firm in his commitment to his people, leaving Bob to ponder their next move in this high-stakes game of alliances and loyalties. As tensions escalated between Schultz and Sinclair, Bumpy took matters into his own hands, pledging to oust the Dutchman from Harlem without resorting to bloodshed. But Sinclair, fueled by vengeance, insisted on a more drastic approach, demanding Schultz's demise. Refusing to succumb to Sinclair's insistence on violence, Bumpy cautioned against the repercussions of an all-out war, emphasizing the financial strain and prolonged conflict it would entail. Despite Sinclair's claims of ample funds, Bumpy highlighted the practical challenges of sustaining a prolonged battle against Schultz's forces. Pooling their resources, Bumpy and Sinclair convened a meeting with key figures from Harlem's gambling scene to garner support for their cause. While many expressed skepticism about Bumpy's plan, fearing financial losses and retribution from Schultz, some chose to stand by him. With the backing of his old allies Nath, Finley, and Johnny, Bumpy forged ahead in the escalating conflict. However, when he crossed paths with Bob Violet, now aligned with Schultz, he received a warning to tread carefully amidst the escalating hostilities. "I've been looking for you," Bob's voice rang out, his demeanor tense as he kept one hand concealed in his pocket. Nath, noticing Bob's suspicious gesture, subtly signaled reassurance to Bumpy. With a cautious eye on Bob, Bumpy maintained composure, reminding him of his allegiance to Quinny. Bob's response was confrontational, warning Bumpy of the impending downfall of Sinclair, inciting a challenge between their respective factions. Undeterred, Bumpy stood his ground, questioning Bob's willingness to face him and his men in battle. Bob's acknowledgement of the brewing conflict only fueled Bumpy's resolve, prompting an exchange of parting words laden with tension. As they went their separate ways, Bumpy couldn't shake the sense of responsibility weighing upon him. With his friends by his side, he likened himself to a commander-in-chief, tasked with leading his small army into battle against Schultz's forces. Securing weapons became their immediate priority, with Finley entrusted to procure them. Johnny's strategic prowess made him indispensable in executing Bumpy's plans, while Bumpy himself assumed the role of the calculating mastermind, driven by a determination to settle scores by any means necessary. Despite being outnumbered, Bumpy and his men relied on guerrilla tactics to level the playing field against Schultz's soldiers. Their ability to blend seamlessly into the bustling streets of Harlem gave them a crucial advantage. However, facing Bob Violet's gang posed a formidable challenge, requiring a different approach altogether. Bob's animosity towards Bumpy simmered for years, culminating in repeated clashes between their rival factions. Despite their efforts, neither side could claim a decisive victory. However, their feud reached a turning point in April 1933, when Bob was sentenced to a lengthy prison term unrelated to the Schultz-Sinclair conflict. With Bob behind bars, many of his loyalists abandoned the fight against Bumpy, leaving only steadfast individuals like Ulysses Rollins. Taking Bob's place as Schultz's chief enforcer in Harlem, Rollins made it his mission to dismantle Bumpy's operations. Recognizing Rollins's reputation as a formidable adversary, Bumpy braced himself for the impending showdown. Yet his frustration mounted as Schultz remained elusive, shielded by layers of protection wherever he went. Determined to tip the scales in his favor, Bumpy sought an unconventional ally, Lucky Luciano, the head of the New York Mafia. In late 1934, Bumpy approached Luciano, laying out the escalating bloodshed plaguing Harlem. While Luciano listened attentively, he remained reluctant to intervene directly. However, he made it clear that if he were to intervene, his terms would be stringent. Disappointed by Luciano's refusal to intervene, Bumpy issued a warning, asserting his readiness to retaliate personally if Luciano attempted to target the Harlem numbers racket manager. With a touch of humor, Bumpy recounted Schultz's similar threat 3 years prior, but his jest failed to sway Luciano, leaving their conversation at an impasse. As the conflict in Harlem persisted, Bumpy and Rollins finally crossed paths in the summer of 1935. Enjoying a leisurely dinner with a companion, Bumpy found himself confronted by Rollins, who brandished a knife and lunged at him. Engaging in a fierce struggle, they grappled on the ground until Bumpy emerged victorious, his opponent bearing severe wounds. Despite sustaining serious injuries, Rollins refused to be sidelined, leaving the hospital that same evening, determined to settle the score. Tracking down Bumpy to a restaurant on 125th Street, Rollins unleashed a hail of bullets aimed at his head. Miraculously, Bumpy escaped unscathed, the bullet grazing his hat and inadvertently striking an innocent bystander. Following Rollins's arrest, Bumpy counted his blessings and resolved to forego wearing hats ever again, a symbolic gesture marking his survival on that fateful day. Despite the victory over Rollins, Bumpy's desire to take down Schultz remained strong, a wish that was granted in October 1935. Luciano and his associates deemed Schultz's actions, including the murder of prosecutor Thomas Dewey, unacceptable and orchestrated his demise in a New Jersey restaurant. With Schultz eliminated, Harlem reclaimed its freedom, bringing an end to the prolonged conflict. However, uncertainty loomed over the reorganization of the illegal lottery operations in Schultz's absence. The possibility of Luciano assuming control posed a potential threat to Bumpy's influence. 1 week after Schultz's death, Bumpy met with Luciano once more to address the post-war landscape. Recognizing the reality of his position, Bumpy conceded his inability to win a war against Luciano, but emphasized his commitment to retaining African-American control over Harlem's gambling business. In response, Luciano assured Bumpy of his intention to maintain peace among the key players in Harlem's gambling scene, signaling a new chapter in their relationship and the future of organized crime in Harlem. During the war, Bumpy had advocated that any new lottery ventures in the neighborhood would fall under Mafia control. Building on this notion, he proposed to Luciano that he become the Mafia's partner in Harlem, ensuring that no moves would be made without his approval and a fair share of the business. Negotiations between Bumpy and Luciano stretched on for hours as they hammered out the details. Bumpy shrewdly pointed out that Luciano was too astute a businessman to simply eliminate him and seize control outright. As discussions progressed, laughter eventually filled the room. After much deliberation, an agreement was reached. Bumpy had secured a peace deal with honor, holding his ground against New York's most influential power brokers. This accomplishment elevated his standing in Harlem, attracting numerous admirers eager to curry favor with him and his associates. As Bumpy moved through Harlem, drinks flowed freely in his honor, and he found himself surrounded by an increasing number of admirers, including celebrities. Yet what he valued most was the respect shown by the Italian gangsters who honored the agreement he struck with Luciano. None dared to tamper with the lotteries under Bumpy's protection, knowing they'd face his wrath if they did. However, this newfound equilibrium was disrupted when a problem arose with one of the lottery managers Bumpy was safeguarding. To address the issue, Luciano summoned him to his opulent suite at the Waldorf Astoria one afternoon. "So, what happened?" Luciano inquired. "Nothing much," replied Bumpy. "I've heard that business hasn't been great lately," Luciano pressed. "Really? That's unfortunate. Is there anything I can do to assist you? We're both businessmen, operating with transparency. If you encounter a problem, you come to me and I'll resolve it. Remember, I'm the boss. We had an agreement. You wouldn't interfere with any of the independent lottery managers. The individual in question owes us money. If he's in debt to us, it's our rightful claim. Understand?" Luciano stated firmly. "No, I don't understand. If you had an issue with one of my associates, why didn't you come directly to me? In Harlem, I'm the boss, and you should remember that. Now, you're the boss of Harlem, and you can oversee the rest of New York. I respect that. You're a man deserving of respect, and you know that I'm a man who reciprocates respect, regardless of one's background, whether they're a Jew, an Irishman, or a black. We all aim to prosper, live, and let live," Bumpy asserted. "Exactly," Bumpy replied. The two men continued their discussion and eventually reached an understanding. As Bumpy prepared to depart, he noticed a chessboard on a nearby table. "Do you play chess?" Bumpy asked. "Yes. And you?" Luciano responded. "It doesn't matter. I should have guessed, though," Bumpy mused. "What do you mean?" Luciano inquired. "What kind of man always seems to anticipate his moves several steps ahead?" Bumpy countered. "You do too," Luciano observed. "Me? No. I plan 4 or 5 moves ahead," Bumpy quipped. Bumpy and Luciano settled down at the chess table and played a few games. Bumpy won the first game, Luciano won the next, and the 2 subsequent games ended in a draw, a pattern that would continue every time they played chess together. This friendly relationship between the two men continued until 1936, at which point Luciano was imprisoned for forced prostitution. Shortly after, in 1937, Bumpy also found himself behind bars for criminal assault. He had intervened in defense of a mistreated girl under his protection and received a 10-year sentence. Sent to Dannemora prison, Bumpy reportedly saved Lucky Luciano in the prison yard from an assailant, earning himself some special privileges, including access to Italian cuisine. Upon his release from Dannemora in 1947, Bumpy returned to Harlem to find significant changes. The Italians had gained control over many aspects of the businesses, raising concerns about his ability to operate a lottery. Frustrated, Bumpy exclaimed, "Since when do I need some thug's permission to open a lottery? Things have changed. Nowadays, nobody opens an establishment without the Italians say so from the inside." A few days later, Bumpy visited Joe Adonis, the interim head of operations since Luciano's deportation to Italy. Bumpy harbored mixed feelings about Joe Adonis. He found him vain and pretentious, the type who couldn't pass a mirror without pausing to adjust his hair and admire himself. However, Bumpy did acknowledge Adonis's business acumen and relative loyalty. During their meeting, Joe Adonis was accompanied by Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, Tommy Hooks, and Albert Anastasia, trusted individuals who executed Luciano's orders during his imprisonment and later exile in Italy. As a gesture to welcome Bumpy back, Joe Adonis presented him with a substantial envelope containing $6,000 and a brand new 1947 black Lincoln Continental. While Bumpy appreciated the gesture, he expressed a preference for Cadillacs. Adonis assured him, No problem. Take the Lincoln for now. I'll have it replaced with a Cadillac in a few days. Expressing his gratitude, Bumpy mentioned his plans to re-enter the lottery business, similar to his previous endeavors. Adonis inquired, "You have approval from one of our friends?" Bumpy clarified, "I don't need anyone's approval. I'll resume my business as I've always done." Adonis then proposed organizing a meeting to further discuss the matter. Later that evening, Bumpy received a phone call, and the following day, he met with the Italians in the east side of Harlem. Accompanied by Nath, Johnny, and 2 other armed friends, they convened to discuss his plans. In the Rue de Nietzsche, Bumpy and his men calmly took their seats at a table with the Italian mobsters. Anthony Salerno, also known as Fat Tony, a rising Italian gangster who would later become the head of the Genovese crime family, was in charge of the gambling business in Harlem on behalf of the Mafia at that time. Fat Tony spoke, "We've heard that you want to get back into the business, and we want to help you. We've always appreciated you, and we know you're a man worthy of respect. So what do you want to do?" Bumpy replied, "Firstly, I want to thank you for your gracious offer of help. I also appreciate the gifts you've given me, but I don't want to take advantage of our friendship. You've already done so much. I simply want to reopen my lottery on 135th Street and run it independently." Fat Tony responded, "My friend, it won't be as simple as that." Bumpy asked, "Oh, it seems pretty straightforward to me." Fat Tony explained, "I'm sure you understand that things have changed since you've been away. It's just how things work now." Bumpy inquired, "You want to open an establishment on 135th Street? Perfect. We'd be happy to let you do that. But you must understand that you'll be running the place, and the earnings will need to fall under our control. You know we'll cut you in. You've earned our respect." Bumpy asserted, "Well, I expect you to honor the deal that was in place before I left." Fat Tony clarified, "If you want to do business, you do it with us. I had a deal." Bumpy firmly stated, "As far as I'm concerned, the deal is still on the table. The people in charge at the table have changed, and so has the arrangement." Refusing to be intimidated, Bumpy chuckled and then rose from his seat with his men. He turned to Adonis and said, "I suppose this meeting is over. You should let our friend know what happened and that I'm not very pleased with the situation." Adonis questioned, "You're trying to give me orders, Bumpy?" Bumpy assured, "No, I wouldn't presume to give you orders, just as you know I wouldn't take any. We're equals, and we always have been. But please pass along my regards to our friend during your next contact, and let him know that I was glad to be of assistance during our shared absence." Bumpy's contemplation of returning to war with the Mafia was met with uncertainty among his men. They discussed potential moves, including the idea of kidnapping, which seemed surreal for a group of African Americans to consider targeting members of the Mafia. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was picked up by a police bug planted nearby, shocking even the seasoned police inspectors who monitored the recording. However, violence was averted as Joe Adonis relayed the situation to Lucky Luciano, who insisted on honoring the deal with Bumpy and meeting his demands. Later, Dennis questioned Bumpy about why he hadn't shared the extent of his actions to save Luciano's life. As a gesture of gratitude, Dennis presented Bumpy with keys to a brand new Cadillac. With his dominance reaffirmed and his lottery business revived, Bumpy's influence in Harlem soared. The business proved highly profitable, adding to his already formidable reputation in the neighborhood. Until he crossed paths with a young man named Flash Walker, Bumpy's life continued on its successful trajectory. Flash, a penniless orphan in search of employment, was introduced to Bumpy by a mutual acquaintance one December evening in 1948. Moved by compassion, Bumpy offered Flash a job assisting his wife with household chores as an act of charity. Despite Flash's humble beginnings, there was something enchanting about him. He seamlessly integrated into the Johnson family and quickly became like a son to Bumpy, who had never experienced fatherhood himself. Their bond grew stronger with time, much to the slight jealousy of Bumpy's daughters, who noticed the special connection between the two. As their relationship deepened, Bumpy began entrusting Flash with more responsibilities, eventually offering him a position in one of his lottery businesses. Flash's natural charm proved to be a valuable asset, persuading clients to place larger bets and significantly boosting profits. Bumpy's confidence in Flash soared, leading him to include him in important meetings, including those with Italian associates. While there may be discrepancies in the portrayal of their relationship, particularly in the depiction by Denzel Washington's character Frank Lucas in American Gangster, the true story of Flash Walker and his bond with Bumpy Johnson remains a fascinating chapter in Harlem's history. The romance between Flash and Bumpy endured for over 2 years until an event occurred that would change everything. In 1949, Flash Walker encountered a pimp who presented him with a tempting offer. The pimp requested Flash to cash suspicious checks that appeared to be stolen without arousing any suspicions or involving the bank. Seeing this as an opportunity to earn extra cash alongside his earnings from Bumpy, Flash agreed to the deal and deposited the funds into the bank account of the man who considered him his own son. Little did he know, this decision would lead him into trouble with the law. Upon learning about the situation, Bumpy was furious. He paced around the room, contemplating the potential consequences of Flash's actions. Suddenly, one of his 16-year-old daughters approached him with disturbing news. She revealed that Flash had slapped her on the buttocks earlier that day. Bumpy's shock was evident as he struggled to comprehend the gravity of the situation. Before he could fully process this revelation, his other daughter appeared and echoed the same disturbing encounter with Flash, revealing that it wasn't the first time he had acted inappropriately. Filled with rage, Bumpy wasted no time in confronting Flash. Spotting him leaving his house, Bumpy approached him without a word and immediately struck him in the face. Flash was taken aback by the sudden attack, unable to react as Bumpy unleashed his fury, delivering blow after blow. In a fit of rage, Bumpy didn't respond to the insults thrown at him. He continued to unleash a relentless barrage of blows on Flash, the scene growing increasingly brutal. Flash's face was left unrecognizable as Bumpy finally paused, catching his breath before delivering a final blow to Flash's head, eliciting a scream from him. "Don't you ever come near me or my family again, or I'll end you," Bumpy threatened, his voice cold and menacing. Despite the threats, Flash persistently called Bumpy every hour, desperate to talk, but Bumpy ignored each call. During a card game with his old friends, Bumpy mulled over the situation. "You should have just put him down for good, Bumpy. A beatdown like that in front of everyone, he won't forget it," one of his friends remarked. "Seems like you've got yourself a lifelong enemy now. Johnny might flip on you," added another. Bumpy remained indifferent to their warnings. "Let him meddle if he wants. I'm with Johnny on this." "It's done," he retorted coldly. Another friend interjected, "Why not take care of him before he causes more trouble? It's better to handle it now." But Bumpy stood firm. "I did what I had to do, and it's done," he reiterated, ignoring the counsel of his friends, perhaps holding on to some lingering attachment to his former protégé. However, Bumpy's decision would come back to haunt him when he learned one evening that Flash intended to set him up by hiding a package of heroin under one of his couch cushions with the help of one of his exes, then tipping off the police. In response, Bumpy urgently convened all his associates for an emergency meeting in his living room. After a lengthy discussion, they set out together to find Flash, but their efforts were in vain. By the time they located him, it was already too late. In a surprising turn of events, Bumpy found himself arrested at his residence by 2 narcotics agents. They whisked him away to the Narcotics Bureau, where he was stunned to discover that Flash had implicated him in a heroin-related incident dating back to December 1950. Flash had falsely claimed to authorities that he was dealing drugs on Bumpy's behalf, an accusation even the narcotics officers found dubious. None of them had ever heard of Bumpy being involved in the drug trade. The Bureau of Narcotics seized upon the opportunity to crack down on drug activity in Harlem. While Bumpy vehemently maintained his innocence, the federal authorities saw him as a valuable asset in identifying other drug traffickers in the area. Despite his efforts to prove his innocence, Bumpy was relentlessly harassed by authorities who repeatedly pressured him to provide names in exchange for dropping the case. However, Bumpy staunchly refused to cooperate. After years of legal battles, Bumpy's trial finally commenced in June 1953. Despite being free on bail during this time, the prospect of facing judgment loomed heavily over him. His lawyer found some hope in the jury's relatively brief 3-hour deliberation. as lengthy deliberations typically suggested a guilty verdict was being considered. Yet to the shock of many, Bumpy was ultimately convicted on 2 counts of drug trafficking. The verdict sent shockwaves through his loved ones, signaling the impending sentence of 15 years in prison. Bumpy's tenure in detention unfolded primarily at Alcatraz, a notorious prison housing the nation's most dangerous criminals. Inside those walls, guards addressed inmates by their assigned numbers rather than their names, a tactic aimed at psychological dismantlement. The federal government took extreme measures to ensure that escape from this fortress was virtually impossible. Yet in 1962, Frank Maurice and the Angeline brothers orchestrated a legendary escape, the sole successful breakout in Alcatraz's history. Rumors suggested they received outside assistance, possibly from someone with influential connections, a benefactor who facilitated a boat for their passage across San Francisco Bay. Some whispered that this benefactor might have been Bumpy Johnson himself. Bumpy's own prison term was shortened to 10 years, and he was granted parole in 1963. Johnny arrived in a 1962 Cadillac Eldorado convertible to welcome him back, heralding his return throughout Harlem. The streets erupted with jubilation as crowds cheered, confetti cascading around the car. It was a reception fit for a king, a testament to the enduring reverence the people of Harlem held for him. Standing amidst the throng, Bumpy was moved to tears, profoundly touched by the outpouring of affection. It was a poignant moment, hinting at the eventual farewell on the horizon. Bumpy had been battling heart issues since early 1967, and sadly, they would claim his life a year later. On July 7, 1968, at the age of 62, Bumpy prepared for dinner at a Harlem restaurant. His legacy, however, would endure far beyond his final moments, forever etched into the fabric of Harlem's history. Bumpy's sudden passing sent shockwaves through Harlem, marking the end of an iconic era. He was a figure of profound complexity, often characterized as a gangster with a conscience, a man who, despite his criminal activities, held a deep-seated commitment to helping the less fortunate in his community. Hundreds gathered to bid farewell to this enigmatic figure, often likened to Harlem's own Robin Hood. Though Bumpy vehemently maintained his innocence regarding the drug trafficking charges that landed him in Alcatraz, he did eventually become entangled in the drug trade in the late 1960s. His life journey was one of contrasts, a man of keen intellect who could have pursued conventional careers, but instead ascended to prominence as a gang leader. Some speculate that he harbored regrets about his educational path. Nevertheless, his legacy endures as a testament to the African-American experience, a narrative of humble beginnings ascending to the zenith of New York's underworld. With only a small cadre of loyal associates, Bumpy defied the entrenched power of the Italian Mafia, emerging as Harlem's solitary emissary of organized crime. Enduring 26 years of incarceration and surviving 15 gunshot wounds, he was once dubbed by a prosecutor as one of the most formidable criminals in Harlem's annals. As you conclude this video, consider showing your support by liking and sharing it. Stay tuned for future content, where the first-person voiceover will return, exploring topics of continued interest. And remember to explore the Mayor's Page service mentioned earlier. Lastly, check out the new illustration by Manon Potier featuring Bumpy Johnson's mugshot available on the TP. Details can be found in the video's description. Until next time, take care.